Assassinations appear to be making a bit of a comeback. On Wednesday night in Washington, D.C., we heard news of a shooting outside the Capitol Jewish Museum of two members of staff of the Israeli embassy in DC. And this is the latest in a number of similar and similarly high profile shootings, and shootings which, with varying degrees of targeting, have been assassinations. There was the shooting of Brian Thompson by Luigi Mangione in December of 2024, which many of you will remember, have read a lot about, have continued to hear a lot about, have seen memed a lot. There were, during the election in the US, there were at least 2 assassination attempts on Donald Trump at various different locations. And the event which some of these, and not all of them, but some of them feel like a thematic continuation of, is the assassination of Shinzo Abe in Japan back in 2022. And it feels like this has been a return of the assassination as a thing which happens as an political act, if we want to kind of give it that agency, in a way that in the US, in the UK, and sort of like wealthier countries, we have not been used to seeing for some time. In the UK, we've had similar assassinations of politicians. We saw the assassination of Joe Cox, Member of Parliament, back in 2016. We had David Armas, who was stabbed in 2021. And all of this has kind of seen a return of, and I don't know, for anyone watching on as a kind of decent person, this is a worrying thing to see. This is not the kind of thing that we would like to see happening in our society. It's not something, but there's 2 elements to it, really. We have the fact that it is not something that we would like to see individual people choosing to do, but it also feels like not something that a healthy political environment breeds either. This is something that I've been thinking about quite a lot for some time, and the way in which I came to doing a lot of thinking about this was maybe not a usual one. So I've been doing a bunch of thinking and writing over the last months about kind of our increasing feeling of a lack of agency within our economy. Some of you will remember a video that I made
legalizing the
couple of years now, maybe
that they had
1 or 2 years ago now.
Griftonomics,
Why Scams
AI to make over $10,000
which I talk a little bit about scams, both on the low level of people trying to get your money on the internet, but also on the slightly larger scale, right? Whether that's your Adobe's trying to lock you into a subscription, whether it's your energy company being allowed to inflate prices to wherever they want them to be because they've got a monopoly over your energy supply or your water company, all the way up to things like, every newspaper website you go to now, at least in the UK, when you get there, you are given a page which asks you, which has existed for a long time in Europe because of GDPR laws, asks you if you want to accept cookies or not. But all of these companies now have decided to run a model that you can say no to cookies, but you have to pay to do so. And whether that's legal or not is a whole other thing. But it increasingly feels like throughout our economy, there are places where companies just treat us with contempt, and they can do so because they are, because they either have a monopoly over that space or at least have enough power over us that they can kind of do whatever they want. And so I was doing a lot of thinking about this, and the example, and a lot of thinking about moments where there is some resistance to that and like moments of revolt. And the big one that I had been thinking about at a point had been, you can always pirate Adobe product, it's always morally correct, right? And that had been my like peak example of people being like, do you know what, Adobe's gone too far, we're gonna stop paying for their products, ha ha ha. Yeah, the Serial Chick says there's a similar one for Nintendo games. And then, in December, Luigi Mangione shot Brian Thompson, and a lot of the popular response to that was, even where there was a level of horror or disgust or whatever around the act of assassination, the act of killing, that often sat alongside an acceptance of the idea that the motive had some merit, right? That the system that had caused Luigi Mangione to act was as horrific as he suggested. And I think what I instantly found was that in a way that makes this thing seem flippant and stupid and pointless, and just like silly marginal little thing, there was, however, a similar thing happening here, but in a much more intense way, obviously. With Mangione himself, potentially, but certainly in the popular response, was that there was this really clear sense that the way in which people experience the American healthcare system is that there is this system which exists, which in theory is supposed to be about providing you with healthcare. And even though that costs money, the compromise way of looking at it is that the money-making aspect of it, the whole kind of like insurance industry part of it, is necessary in order to make the healthcare bit of it work, right? There's all kinds of apologia for the US American healthcare, the US healthcare system, which you see, people like to talk about the idea that there's like death panels in other countries, right? Because the government gets to like ration healthcare and therefore gets to decide who lives and dies, or they talk about the length of queues in the UK or in Canada or other countries where there's either a public healthcare system or there's some sort of slightly less free market capitalist model. And yet, whether or not this was exactly Mangione's motive, certainly in a lot of the popular reaction to the act, there was this really clear sense of people going, do you know what, actually this entire system, which I'm told is meant to exist to provide me with healthcare, actually seems to exist to try and deny me healthcare, right? That actually seems to, if you take the kind of like tech bro slogan of, the function, the purpose of a system is what it does. There is an extent to which the US healthcare system exists to stop people from getting healthcare, because that is the way in which the economics of the system work. And he famously sketched or carved into the bullets deny, defend, depose as a reference to the idea that what insurance companies do is to delay, deny, and defend in order to avoid paying out, even in circumstances where the whole point of the insurance company of existing is for them to pay out. And this really kind of... And so I suppose what you end up with is that the only way you can kind of view that scenario is one in which either the individual, Luigi Mangione, or at the very least the people who have seen that happen and have, whatever their feelings about the actual act of murder, have gone, I can understand where that guy is coming from, to the point where, you know, the culture was awash with t-shirts, murals, memes, all of this. And underneath it was this kind of abiding sense that what made sense about the act, or what gave some sense of logic to the act, regardless of when one thought it was morally acceptable or not, was that not only was this entire system set up to stop healthcare from happening, but there also was not a lever that most people could pull which would even change that. And I don't think that this is something which has run through every single assassination attempt that we've seen over the past few years. Particularly if we look at some of the assassination attempts on Donald Trump. Perhaps I've missed some elements here, but within the two of those that I've sort of done some reading around, you know, there does seem to be a little bit more of a kind of guy who's not having a good time, has maybe got some quite confused ideas. It's much harder to find something in there. And what we've seen is that didn't really... those stories kind of fizzled away, not only because obviously the outcome was different, but also because there wasn't really so much to latch onto. But there was a lot of the sort of seeds of the cultural response to the Luigi Mangione moment and someone mentioned this in the chat a little while ago, the assassination of Shinzo Abe in Japan in 2022, where, again, lots of people thought, you know, maybe hot take assassinating people is bad, but could 100% see the logic of the guy that did it, because there was this whole sort of web of things of his mum, I believe, was locked into the Moonies and they'd taken a bunch of money, and that there was this sort of web of connection to Abe and his father. And, you know, as a lot of the sort of more recent commentary around this act has talked about, a lot of what happened in the wake of that was that people saw the kind of almost saw the guy's perspective, right? And whether or not they think the specific thing he did was correct, they could see that it was a result of a whole system where, again, there was no lever on which he could pull to get justice for his mum, I'm fairly sure it was, or to get justice for himself, and to see the people that he felt, and I think since it's kind of been substantiated, had sort of preyed upon his parent. People could see that that was the result of being in a situation where there wasn't a lever to pull. And so last week, we've seen another assassination, and I think some of this, unfortunately, we just get into copycat territory where these things become difficult to avoid, in the sense that they get press attention, and therefore people sort of will copy that tactic. Where two members of embassy staff who, it's worth saying, I mean, I was reading some commentary about this, that, you know, the guy Elias Rodriguez who shot these members of staff, this sort of young couple, didn't even necessarily know that they were members of embassy staff, right? He was just sort of like hoping that whoever it was came out of that event was like relevant in some vague way. And reading about it it's horrible, right? The whole event is horrific. I think there is a lot in there. Some of you will have seen some of the commentary around his manifesto as well, seen sort of various parts of the political journey he's taken. Not only is the act horrific, it's not one that's gained any political capital, right? It's not a particularly useful thing to have done, even if it wasn't horrible. Yet, it really feels like what we've done is create a political environment in which this thing is more likely to happen, because the levers on which we are supposed to be able to pull to get justice, as in the case of the sort of Arbe situation, economically, to get healthcare, or be treated in the way, be able to have honest and decent interactions with companies in the economy, as in the Mangione Thompson assassination, or to see justice on the international stage, have been taken away. And that leads to a scenario in which there are some people who will reach the end of their tether and will act in these horrible ways. And I remember back when Luigi Mangione shot Brian Thompson, there were some people on Twitter, on social media, or wherever, who were viewing this, almost as the start of the revolution or something, right? Or even if they thought it was a horrific act, seeing it in such a way as that they thought maybe this might bring a kind of Arbe-style reckoning of some description. Unfortunately, I don't think that's the case. I think what we actually see in all of these is a moment in which the kind of ways in which our economic and political sort of fabric has been shifted in order precisely to disempower people, whether that's politically, economically, in terms of legal justice, get to such a point where people kind of don't care anymore. We've locked people out of the political system to such an extent that this stuff, it feels like we're breeding this kind of stuff in a way which is not pro-social, right? You know, I think one of the real challenges, and, you know, this is so far from being the fault of these two people. Like, I think the fact that whatever they did as a job, like whatever, like I think what am I trying to say? What we've seen in terms of Israel's genocide in Gaza has been a kind of similar, not only a locking out from the political process. You know, if you look at the last US election, to kind of give it the context in which this assassination took place, there was not a way you could have voted if you cared about Gaza. Right? We had the undeclared, uncommitted vote in Michigan, where like a decent number of people turned out to go, no, we're not gonna lend our nomination votes to Joe Biden, and that was reasonably sizable. The number, you know, it wasn't a majority, but it was like a far larger number of people than anyone expected. And yeah, kind of that never really went anywhere. Democratic Party never really took any account of that. Biden became the nominee anyway, which we know was ludicrous. Then Kamala Harris sort of just stepped into his shoes in ways which I'm sure made sense within the rules of the Democratic Party. Like, I'm sure they managed to make the rules of that work, but in any common sense view of things, it's easy to view that as not feeling particularly democratic, right? And the stance on Israel's actions in Gaza never really changed, and there was no way you could have voted to impact that in any way. What's also been happening on the international stage, right, is that Israel has blatantly been disregarding any kind of humanitarian international laws, any kind of like rules of war that we have, in ways that sort of our governments, whether that's the UK, the US, many European governments, that's me sort of assuming that a lot of people are watching from those places, the same kind of moral standards that we quite rightly use to judge leaders of other countries, Vladimir Putin to name but one, where we go, you know, you are doing this horrific thing, therefore you shouldn't be in the Olympics, you shouldn't be in the thing, we're going to provide military support to people, to Ukraine, for example, or people that are opposing you. Both those moral standards in the kind of ways in which things are talked about, you know, we saw there was a interview where Keir Starmer, then leader of the Labour Party, now Prime Minister, suggested that Israel did have the both the legal right but also the moral right to turn off water and electricity to the Gaza Strip, in a way that, you know, if many other countries had done that, the RAF would have been conducting bombing raids. And so there's been a very similar thing of, you know, if you are someone who feels strongly that what you are seeing of what is happening in Gaza is abhorrent, you know, what is the political lever on which you pull to try and do something about that? Basically nothing, right? There is you can go on a massive protest march and you will come away feeling a bit more sane, realizing that there are lots of people out there who also recognize what is going on. You know, you can write to your representatives or your member of parliament, you can do all these things, but the reality is that they won't really move the needle. And therefore you end up in that space where, you know, and I want to say this again, this does not justify the act in any way, shape, or form. However, what you do see is a political environment that has kind of bred that act. And I don't think this is something which, and you know, I don't think this is a particularly partisan thing that is happening. I don't think it's particularly partisan in the spaces where, I don't know, I would like to hope that more assassinations aren't going to happen. Like, I don't want to kind of put that into the world, but it feels like there is a lot about how both our economy and our politics is working at the moment, which is so unhealthy that it kind of breeds this stuff. And I don't think that if we did have a political system where, you know, votes get counted in better ways in terms of like people feeling like when they vote it matters more, where if people signed a petition it felt like it got listened to, like, or where, you know, it felt like the moral standards on different countries, different people within countries, I don't know, whatever, like, were a bit more even. I don't think it's necessarily the case to say that this stuff wouldn't happen, but I do worry that we're heading down that road, and that we do kind of really need to think about how do we want our democracies to operate. Because to my mind, in all of these cases, there are clearly failings of individual human beings who have decided to do things which are horrific. However, there is also a political environment which is so disempowering people that, I don't know, that it creates an environment where people can get to that point. Thank you so much for watching this clip from one of my Monday night live shows. If you'd like to find out how to join me for those live shows over on Twitch, then you can find out a little bit more information about how to do so down below. And if you'd like to watch more of these clips ad and sponsor free, then you can do so over on Nebula, my premium streaming service that I've been working on with a bunch of other indie creators that I'm sure you know and love for the past bunch of years now. Nebula is the premium streaming service of all good education and education adjacent creators. Over there you can watch all of our usual videos, ad and sponsor free, as well as a growing catalogue of exclusive content, such as my debut feature-length documentary Boomers, which has been out for coming on for 5 or 6 months now, but in which I take a look at the lives and legacy of the baby boomer generation through a road trip across the US, the Europe and the UK. You can also watch over there my Nebula exclusive class, How to Research Like a PhD Student, which I take you through all of the skills which I use to put together these videos, both here on the Clips channel and also over on the main channel, how I kind of absorb lots of research and all that stuff. And we also have a bunch of other stuff, such as Bobby Broccoli's new documentary, 17 Pages, and a bunch of other narrative films and shows too. If you'd like to join Nebula and get access to all of that beautiful exclusive stuff, then you can do so using my personal link, go.nebula.tv/Tom Nicholas, and that'll get you 40% off an annual plan for doing so. That brings the cost to about $3 a month, which is still by far the cheapest streaming service you'll even be able to find to sign up to for some absolutely excellent stuff and to support the work of some really well-meaning and enthusiastic creators such as myself. That link again is go.nebula.tv/Tom Nicholas. Thanks for watching once again, and I'll see you over on Nebula.